Welcome to the Little Faith Podcast, and I'm going to say to you, 恭喜发财，红包拿来哦. What does that mean? Well, it means I wish you a fortune, now give me my money. Yes, that is what we say during the Lunar New Year, and it is the Lunar New Year here in Taiwan and in Asia, all around the globe. Today, we're going to talk about what it's like during the Lunar New Year here in Taiwan. Now, I have to say right off the bat, by calling it the Lunar New Year, now that's not going to sit well with some people, I'm going to say. And this is where it gets a little bit political. I mentioned before, I do not like to get into politics. I don't want to dabble in it. But people have been debating about this, whether we should call it the Chinese New Year or the Lunar New Year here in Taiwan. Now, we all know that Taiwan and China, we have a very unique and intertwined history accompanied by a very complex political relationship. Well, when you say the Lunar New Year, 农历年, some people might find that insensitive. They might think you're trying to downplay the historical cultural roots tied to China. Now, I don't think like that, but while other people, on the other hand, they might think that people who think like that are simply reading too much into it. Because first of all, it is based on the lunar calendar, so there's nothing wrong calling it the Lunar New Year. And on top of that, the New Year is also celebrated in a lot of other Asian countries. It's not just Taiwan, it's not just China. There's also Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, the Koreas, both North and South. They call it Solar. 새해 복 많이 받으세요. That means Happy New Year in Korean. Also in Mongolia, and very much to my surprise, actually, Japan does not officially observe the Lunar New Year, and it has been so ever since 1873. I'm just so outdated because this is the first time I picked up on this information. This was due to the westernization during the Meiji Restoration. So now the Japanese, they do not do the Lunar New Year, they only do January the 1st, just like everybody else in the Western Hemisphere. As for me, if you ask my opinion, I am pretty much okay with both, all right? I really do not mind. I will say, though, when I was working at a radio station in Taiwan, this was an English radio station, by the way, we did call it the Lunar New Year. And there's a reason for that, because there's a lot of people of different ethnicities who live here in Taiwan who celebrate the Lunar New Year. So out of respect, we call it the Lunar New Year, all right? But that's just me. As I said, I'm okay with both. Lunar, Chinese New Year, 中国年, 农历年, it's all fine with me. All right, so let's put that all aside right now. With that aside, I want to get into the fun stuff. What do we do during the Lunar New Year? And I'm saying lots of stuff, fun stuff. First of all, and most important of all, the family gatherings. And that's the core event of the entire festival. First of all, there's New Year's Eve. We call it 除夕. Now, there's this reunion dinner where you get to see your cousins, your uncles, aunties, mostly from your father's side, and a lot of relatives you probably haven't seen for centuries. It always gets kind of awkward when you're trying to call out somebody's name or his or her title. 叔叔, 舅舅. There's all kinds of different titles in Mandarin. It's really complicated. I still can't wrap my head around this, even after decades of living here. So we have reunion dinner, and after that, we stay up late. We stay up actually all through the night, all the way till morning time. That is just part of the tradition. It's called 守岁. And during this time, we play with firecrackers. We get red envelopes. The kids. And there's more food, lots and lots of food. I remember when I was a kid, I loved the Lunar New Year. I would play with my cousins. We would play with firecrackers, fireworks. We would actually throw firecrackers and colored smoke bombs into our older cousin's house. And that would piss him off. He would come barging out of his door cursing at us. You guys stop, get out of my house. And I remember, I was such a mischievous kid. We had these sparklers. We call them 仙女棒. And one year, I burned my new pants while I was wearing them with a sparkler. And I was like, look, Dad, I'm on fire. And my dad was face palming. Oh my gosh, my kid is stupid. By the way, we get new clothes during the New Year. And that pair of pants was part of the deal. All right. It's part of the tradition to get new clothes during the New Year, by the way. So on the first day, after New Year's Eve, on the first day, it's usually visiting the father's side of relatives. We see our grandparents, our other uncles, and more relatives you probably haven't seen in centuries. And then on the second day of the new year, we visit the mother's side of relatives. Sometimes that means a lot of traveling, getting stuck in traffic, especially if one of your parents is from the north and the other one is from the south. That is a very long travel and it's such a hassle, such a hassle. But overall, the vibe is very, very happy. It's jolly, joyful. You hear music playing all around in the stores, on the streets, on radio, everywhere. And those songs you've been listening to since you were a kid, they've been around forever. Kind of like the Mariah Carey All I Want for Christmas, but just for the Chinese New Year. Songs kind of like dong 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 chang, dong 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 chang, dong 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 chang, gong xi gong xi, fa ya fa da cai. All right. And then there's a lot of greeting each other, neighbor to neighbor, family members, relatives, strangers. On the New Year, we greet each other by saying 新年快乐, Happy New Year, that means. You see, we don't even mention Chinese or lunar. We just say Happy New Year, right? 新年快乐. It's just as simple as that. And we also say 恭喜发财, which we just mentioned. 恭喜发财 means I wish you a fortune. 恭喜 means congrats. 发财 means to make a lot of money. I wish you a fortune. That's how much we love money here. And the kids, they have their own version of that. They say 恭喜发财, 红包拿来. It rhymes. And 红包拿来 means give me my red envelope, which is, red envelopes you probably know about the culture, but usually they contain money in it. So basically by saying 恭喜发财, 红包拿来 is kind of like saying, I wish you a fortune, now give me my money. Kind of gangsta. It's kind of like the Eastern version of trick-or-treating if you think of it, right? Give me my red envelope or else. But Happy New Year to you. So red envelope is 红包and it usually contains money in it. And usually this is given out by the elders of the family, the senior family members who are usually married. They give them out to children. And I'm not married, so in my case, I wouldn't be giving money to any kids, luckily. But when I was a kid, I would get tons of red envelopes because my father has a lot of brothers and sisters, and I would get to keep them. I was the lucky kid. I got to keep my money because I know that there are a lot of parents out there that would take the money saying that, okay, I'm going to deposit this for your college fund, or just straight out saying like, you know what, this is grocery money for next week. Hand it over. So I was lucky to keep my 红包s, my red envelopes. And on the other hand, our parents would also give our grandparents red envelopes to honor their parents. And that is also part of the culture and customs here. During the festival, everything is in red, especially back in the old days, because red is the traditional lucky color in Eastern society, well, in China and Taiwan. And in the past, there was this superstition that if you wore red underwear during New Year's Eve, it would bring you good luck. So I don't know about other people, but I definitely did not try that before. Blue today. So everything is in red. They also put up these, on the doors, they put up these red Spring Festival couplets with calligraphy on them. Very beautiful. Also the red envelopes. Back in the days, people would wear red clothing. Nowadays, that trend has kind of abated. People are more free to wear what they want to wear during the New Year's, but it's still a lot of fun. And it lasts for like 7 days. It's so much fun during this time of the year. There is a fun phenomenon, though. This is something I really want to bring up. In northern cities on the island, like Taipei, during this time of the year, they turn into ghost towns overnight. Like you can literally walk in the middle of the street and not get honked at. Still against the law, so don't try it. But northern cities in Taiwan become ghost towns during the Lunar New Year. Want to take a guess why? Well, in cities like Taipei is, of course, the capital and financial center of Taiwan. Then there's Taoyuan, where the airport is and where there's a lot of manufacturing. Then there's Hsinchu, which is very famous for TSMC, the semiconductor manufacturer. They have an entire ecosystem there, and it's all encapsulated in this one single place called the Hsinchu Science Park, where they have all the major tech companies. So it's kind of like the Silicon Valley of Taiwan. So all these cities, they become empty overnight during the Lunar New Year. Why? Because a lot of people move to these cities to work. But a huge proportion of these people, they actually come from southern or eastern parts of Taiwan. So during the New Year, they go back to their hometowns. So the northern cities, they become like ghost towns. They're emptied. And usually southbound traffic, it goes crazy. It becomes stagnant. And then on the 4th and 5th day of the New Year, traffic is stuck everywhere, especially at the sightseeings, because that's when everybody has finished visiting family and they start going around sightseeing. So it's packed everywhere. Now, on the 6th or 7th day of the new year, northbound traffic starts piling up because everybody's going back. So that's kind of what it's like during the Chinese New Year here in Taiwan. Now, I personally enjoy staying put in my ghost town during the New Year because, first of all, there's no traffic, there's no hustle, it's quiet, there's no crowd, no unwanted attention, no aunties and uncles telling you to get married. I hate that part of the New Year, by the way. I have these younger cousins of mine who are always telling me to hold on there, don't cave into the pressure because you know what? They don't want to get married themselves. And I'm the older cousin right now because all my older cousins, they've all tied the knot already. So I'm the older cousin. So the pressure is on me. The family pressure is on me to get married next. And once I get married, the pressure is going to get passed down to the next cousin. So they don't want me to get married. And I have no intentions of doing so anytime soon too. So I don't travel during the New Year for another reason, and that's basically because my grandparents are all gone. They've passed away within the past couple of years. So for the past couple of years, it has been just me and my parents. My sister is in LA, so we don't get to see her that often. And sometimes it's just me, because sometimes my parents do visit my sister during the New Year. Last year, however, we did get to go to LA and celebrate there. It was kind of fresh, I gotta say. So for the first time in a very, very long while, me, my sister, and my parents, we finally got to sit down at the same table during New Year's Eve and have that family reunion. And that definitely made some good memories, I'm gonna say. And when Taiwanese, they celebrate the New Year abroad, especially when they're not with family, they tend to, invite all the local Taiwanese friends over to one place and they have the reunion dinner together. So they gather together and they keep each other company. And that is what we did last year at my sister's place. Even though we were with family, my sister still invited a bunch of local Taiwanese friends over to her house. And my mom and sis cooked everybody this huge, delicious meal, all authentic Taiwanese style dishes. Everybody had a great time. So after dinner, they were chatting, they were having some drinks, playing board games, and they're goofing around all the way till the middle of the night. I went to bed early because I'm getting older. Now, you might be curious how Christians, all right, being the minority here in Taiwan, how do we celebrate the Lunar New Year? Well, first of all, it's quite the same. But on the church side, church service, worship, it goes on as usual. A lot of the time, the pastors, they stay behind to take care of the sheep. I totally respect that. Not being able to see their own families, staying behind to attend to the congregation, respect. I gotta say, respect. But since most of the people are back in their hometowns, they have a much smaller attendance at church during the New Year. And since everybody's home with family and not everyone gets a free pass to skip these family gatherings, it could be considered rude or inconsiderate, even offensive in some families. So some people, inevitably, they have to skip worship. They have to skip these church meetings. Not like they want to, but they have to because, it's tradition. But churches, they always find a way to work around it. They have extra services or they have service online, et cetera, et cetera. Some pastors playfully call it, during the New Year, they call it the spiritual graveyard time of the year. And what they mean by that is because a lot of people don't go to church during this time of the year. Some people forget to pray. So always before the New Year, you hear these pastors constantly reminding the flock, hey guys, don't forget to pray when you're home. If you can go to church, go to church. If you can't, still remember to read the Bible. You can also join in online. Always present yourself to the Lord, even during the Chinese New Year, okay? God bless you. Also, when you're home, try not to argue with your family. Know that they love you in their own ways and that God loves them too. So treat them as Jesus would treat them and evangelize your family at any chance you might have. And there's always been this sense that, relatives are going to be questioning about your faith, your belief when you go home. And they might even try to talk you out of it. So you got to be prepared for that. So the pastors are always prepping you up for that a week or two before the New Year. But I got to say, in general, there's always been this tug of war between traditional Chinese culture and Christian values, I would say. Now, one of the biggest tensions is about 孝道. And I had to find an equivalent English phrase for that. What I found was filial piety, a very rare phrase in English. Filial piety, which means to honor, to respect, and treat your parents well. That is called 孝道 in Mandarin. And 孝道 is a core value in Eastern society. We take it very seriously when it comes to honoring your parents and elders. So I think that this could also be one of the very reasons that Eastern society sometimes can be a little resistant to Christianity. Because Asian parents would be like, son, if you become Christian, who's going to pay respect to our ancestors now? If you become Christian, you won't be as devoted to our family anymore. They're always worried that the church are going to take their children away. And that is, in my opinion, so not true. So allow me to clear the air here. If you're dubious about this, if you have questions, allow me to explain. And this is just my 2 cents on it, by the way. So Christianity, I will stress and emphasize, Christianity is all for loving your parents. And why do I say that? You probably heard of the 10 Commandments, right? In Chinese, it's called 十戒. Like 十 is 10, 戒 is commandments. The 10 Commandments, you probably heard of Moses before, parting the Red Sea, receiving the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. So the 10 Commandments, they're the teachings, the core teachings in the Old Testament of the Bible. They're the foundation of Judaism and the cornerstones of early Christianity. Now, there are 10 laws in total. That's why they're called the 10 Commandments, of course, right? Duh. Now, the 5th one is, number 5 is, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Honor your father and your mother. One of the pillars of the 10 Commandments is to respect your parents, or else, bang, bang. All right. I don't know if you know this person. He's quite famous. Viktor Frankl, a very famous scholar, famous psychiatrist, founder of logotherapy, also a Holocaust survivor. He has a very famous book called Man's Search for Meaning. Great book. I strongly recommend you it. So Viktor Frankl, at the very beginning of the Nazi occupation of Austria during World War II, he actually had the chance to leave for America. I think he was on a working visa or something. He had a chance to teach in the United States, but he was hesitant about it because that meant, if he left, that meant he would have to leave his elder parents behind, and he was reluctant to do so, even though his parents urged him to leave because they could see that things were getting bad, like really bad in Austria. But as I said, he couldn't make up his mind. Now, one day he came home and he noticed a piece of marble on the table. He asked his father about it. What's this? His father said, I found it in the rubble of a burned down synagogue. Now, the synagogue was burned down by the Nazis. So Viktor Frankl, he was looking at this piece of marble and he was asking his father, what does it say? It was actually part of a tablet of the 10 Commandments, and inscribed on it was the 5th commandment, honor your father and your mother. And that came like an epiphany for him. And on the site, Viktor Frankl decided to stay behind with his parents to protect them. And even though sadly in the end, unfortunately, only he and his little sister were exempt, his entire family died in the concentration camps. Very sad story. But that is just an example, the embodiment of 孝道, filial piety coming from the Bible. Now, I also get why Asian parents kind of think that, okay, Christian values contradict filial piety. It's such a hard word to pronounce. Filial piety, all right. I understand why Asian parents might think that. Because other than, their children once baptized, they spend so much time at church. There's worship, service, all kinds of church meetings, activities, evangelizing. They start spending less and less time at home, right? I understand. That's one part of it. Now, from another angle, there's the misunderstanding of Scripture. I know some people, some parents, they know a thing or two about the Bible, but they don't have the entire picture of it. They don't have the bigger picture. They don't understand the entirety of the Bible. So a lot of times I hear these people citing parts of the Bible. For instance, Jesus once preached, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Wow, now that sounds harsh. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Also, that is preceded by what Jesus says, do you think I came to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on, there will be 5 in one family divided against each other, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother. Wow. Now, upon hearing that, any Asian parent would be like, no, 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 no church, no church. 不能去教会. You stay home, you do your math, you become doctor, you honor your parents. Right? I think it's very reasonable. But, however, if we put that scripture back into context, you'll find a totally different story. Okay, so when did that happen in the scripture? This was a time when Jesus was sending his disciples out to preach to the world. And he knew that it was very, very dangerous. Literally, he said to his disciples, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. You're going to be imprisoned. You're going to be interrogated. Now, when they go after you, remember to flee to another place. Hide yourselves. Because at the time, they were being persecuted. Religious leaders were jealous and they hated Jesus to the extent that they eventually crucified him. That's how much they hated Jesus. And that is why Jesus said, brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me. Everyone's going to hate you because of me. But I tell you this, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Now, what did Jesus represent? What was Jesus preaching that the leaders hated him so much? The core teaching of Jesus was, and here in this incident, was an expert in the law trying to trap Jesus. So he questioned Jesus saying, now you're a teacher yourself. What is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus answered verbatim, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So that was the core teaching of Jesus Christ. He said, love God and to love others as you would love yourself. Love God and love others as you would love yourself. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting and why it's not contradictory to honoring your father and mother as it is laid out in the Bible. Why should we love God first before we love others? Because Jesus mentioned loving God is the first and the most important commandment. The second is love others as you would love yourself. Why is it so? Now, God is complete. God is perfect. God is 100%. And so is his love for mankind. God's love is complete. God's love is perfect, is 100%. So, only when we love God first do we learn to love like God. So if you want to love somebody, ideally, perfectly, 100%, we have to learn to love like God. And with this same logic, to love our parents in a deeper, in a more complete, more comprehensive way, we need to learn to love like God, and thus we need to love God first. And that goes the same for parents, to love our children in a more perfect way. And I know perfect is a very hard word to swallow. You know, there's not a perfect parenting style. How can we ever be perfect? But it's always an ideal to perfect ourselves to reach an ultimate goal, right? So to love our children in a more perfect way, we need to learn to love like God. And thus, before we love our children, we actually need to love God first ourselves. It goes either way, either for children loving their parents or for parents loving their children. We all need to love God first in order to understand how to love. And that is why Jesus said, anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, because you need to love God first. And Jesus was God's messenger, Jesus Christ. So that is why God always comes first. And that is why Jesus said, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Because in a time of persecution, or when people are trying to push back on your faith, would you abandon God's teaching just because someone told you to do so? And if not, there's going to be division, whether it's among friends, whether it's among family, organizations, between nations. People are going to fight because of the truth. Now, in the past, me, myself, unfortunately, there were times that I had family members telling me not to believe in what I believe. They were calling it superstitious, making fun of it. But you know what? I love my family. And because I love my family, I want to love them in the best way possible. And therefore, I love God even more. I put God first, and thus I can love my family even more. So the church, I got to say this, the church isn't trying to take away your child. They're not kidnappers. But it takes time to learn. And that's probably what your children are doing at church right now. That's probably why they're spending so much time, because they're learning to be a better person. They're learning to be more like Jesus so they can learn to love the world, and that includes you. So yeah, Christianity, it does not contradict 孝道, filial piety. It encourages filial piety on the contrary. It is a pillar of Christian teachings to honor your father and your mother. And that comes from loving your God, the only God. All right, so I hope that helps clear it up a bit. Then there's the aspect of, respecting the culture, respecting the customs, right? And there are a lot of customs in traditional Chinese culture, right? So part of these customs is, one of them requires us to burn incense to honor our ancestors. Also, we burn fake paper money. They call it joss paper, 纸钱, 金纸, I think. Because people believe that the burned money goes to the ones who passed. So we don't want them to be poor after they've passed. So we burn this fake money so that they can deposit it in their banks in the spiritual realm. Okay, that's what they believe, all right? But a lot of young people nowadays, they don't observe this custom anymore. Partly because it's not eco-friendly, and more of the times, I think people just find it, they don't believe in it anymore. When I was younger, I would go to temples, graveyards with my extended family, and we would hold these incense sticks called joss sticks, 香, that's what they call it. And that was a way of paying respect to our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. Now, I know some Christians don't like the idea of holding joss sticks. I personally don't have a problem with it because even when I'm doing so, in my heart, I know I'm praying to Jesus. So even when I'm holding a joss stick, in my heart, I'm praying that the angels would guide my ancestors, that Jesus, if possible, would guide and teach their spirits. Because, since many of them most likely never got to hear the gospel in their lifetimes, it would be nice if Jesus would teach them in the spiritual realm. Because if you recall, in the Bible, after Jesus died, Jesus actually did go and preach to the spirits who were lost during the time of Noah. Jesus preached in the spiritual realm. So that is how I pray for my ancestors. I hope that the angels and Jesus would help out my ancestors since they never got to listen to the gospel. And still, I understand some Christians don't feel comfortable holding joss sticks, observing some of these customs. I personally, as I said, I don't have a big problem with it. I'd rather not. But if it would offend anyone, I think it doesn't hurt to hold a stick in your hands. Also, I don't think we should take everything at face value in the Bible. I know there are laws that we should abide by, but sometimes, as I said, we shouldn't take everything at face value. For instance, I'm going to give you a couple examples here. Like in the Old Testament, people were told to keep the Sabbath, and there are strict rules to following the Sabbath. Now, one day, Jesus and his disciples were walking through a grain field, and they got hungry, so some of the disciples, they started picking the grains from the field, and that happened to be on the Sabbath. So the Pharisees learned about this, and they condemned them. By the way, the Pharisees are a group of very rigid teachers of the law, sometimes serious to the extent that they become hypocritical. So they accused Jesus and his disciples of violating the Sabbath. But Jesus rebutted with the story of David. So when David was fleeing the king, King Saul, he and his followers grew tired and they were hungry. They had nothing to eat, no food at all. They encountered a priest and he had some bread. But that bread was consecrated bread, but it was the only thing that they could have to eat. So David and his followers ate consecrated bread. The thing is, consecrated bread is reserved only for the priests by law. So by doing that, David and his followers broke the law. So by citing this story, Jesus showed the people that people of God shouldn't be confined by these ritual regulations. On the contrary, ritual regulations were made to serve God and the people of God, not the other way around. So we shouldn't be confined by regulations. That's what Jesus showed us. Another example, and this is my speculation, my theory of it, and this is the story of the prophet Elijah. Now, Elijah, he offended the king at the time being, and he was fleeing from him. And in the scripture, it says, and this is in God's voice, it says, "You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there." So for years, Elijah, he hid there, and he drank from the stream, and there were ravens that brought food for him twice a day. That's what's depicted in the Bible. Now, I would reasonably guess that, and this is definitely up for debate, I would guess that the ravens were an analogy for something else. And this is my logic behind my thinking, okay? So in the book of Leviticus, it mentions that ravens are categorized as unclean and unsacred animals. So they're unclean, they're unsacred, they're dirty animals. Now, the main gods that the people were worshiping in that region during the time of Elijah were Baal and Asherah. Those were also the gods that the king and his wife were worshiping. And that is the very reason why Elijah fled in the first place, because he condemned the king for worshiping idols. And the worshiping rituals of these gods include like child sacrifice. They burn children in front of Baal. And then there's temple prostitution for Asherah. And of course, I think it goes without saying that in God's eyes, it's profane, it's filthy, it's unacceptable. So, could it be that what fed Elijah wasn't the ravens, but instead it was the worshipers of Baal and Asherah who in God's eyes are unclean? So Elijah, in this theory, was basically eating the unsacred food offerings that were meant to be offered to Baal and Asherah. And people brought these offerings maybe to altars in these remote places, morning and night, twice a day. So what I think is, and I'll mention again, this is up for debate, but I think the ravens were an analogy for idol worshipers. And if that's true, even Elijah, God's prophet, ate from idols' tables. Okay, now even if it's not, let's look to Paul and what he wrote in the first book of Corinthians in chapter 8. He literally starts with, "Now about food sacrificed to idols." All right, it's very specific. It's very clear without a doubt. He's mentioning about food that is sacrificed to idols. Now, the background of this letter is that some believers in Corinth, they argued that since idols aren't really real, it's okay to eat food sacrificed to them. But others refuted, saying, we should abide by the law. We should abstain from, anything related to idols. But Paul makes it very clear in his letter. What he says is, "But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do." And then he mentions, "Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. If what I eat causes my brother," all right, I'm kind of skipping here, but he says, "If what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall." So Paul basically is saying, you have the freedom to eat whatever you want to eat. But if what you eat causes somebody to fall or be tempted, then you shouldn't do it. At least I wouldn't do it. So in a similar sense, I don't refrain from holding a joss stick if I have to. I said I prefer not to, but if it's offending someone or it's causing a family member of mine to develop a grudge against God, and that might become a ditch between him and God one day, then you know what? I'm gonna hold it. I'm gonna let the smoke burn. I'm gonna, it doesn't harm anybody. But while I'm holding that incense stick, beneath my breath, I'm gonna be saying my prayers, and my prayers are to God and Jesus Christ. Now that's what I think about it. I'm not saying that I'm right, but I think it's quite justified. Also, when I'm visiting my grandmother's graveyard, my mom is a Christian too, but she likes to buy fruit, lots of fruit to place in front of her grave. That's a very traditional Chinese custom. We buy fruit to offer to our ancestors. Me, I find it quite unnecessary. If it were up to me, I wouldn't do it, but I don't judge my mom for it because I know that's her way of showing respect. And every time after placing the fruit, my mom always asks me to pray for grandma and our entire family. And that's how we, as Christians, honor our loved ones. So, Christianity is based on love for God and love for others. And to love others, including family, including parents, including children, we need to put God first. We need to first love God. And that is our podcast for today. God bless you all. Happy Chinese Lunar New Year, whatever you want to call it. 恭喜发财，红包拿来啊. Give me my money, man. And I will see you guys next episode. Bye bye. 新年快乐.